How does ATC help pilots in bad weather while navigating the airspace? Time to lock and load in the hangar. Welcome to In the Hangar. I'm Christy Wong. Today's episode is brought to you by Gold Seal and iFly GPS. We're here with two of our local area controllers, Brian Kelly and Matt Wells. Thank you guys so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me today.
Good to be back.
So we're talking about navigating the airspace when there is severe weather, right?
Yep.
Okay, let's talk about that. We're just going to jump right in.
So in Texas, severe weather starts from the west and comes to the east over the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And so you have to start at the beginning. What does the airspace look like? Our airspace looks like a giant stop sign.
Basically, yes.
Yep. And the key is you go out the sides and in the corners for when you depart. But what happens when the west side of the airspace gets completely blocked by thunderstorms and everybody's deviating? Because you don't want to fly through a thunderstorm, turbulence, icing, lightning. And so there's a plan to make that happen and to change your routes. The center will start a program called Severe Weather Action Program.
Swaps.
Okay.
Yep. And so that notice goes out to everybody and they'll say, swap all west routes north and south. And so on the graphic provided, we've got the routes there and you'll see the routes be blocked by the thunderstorm. And then we'll go out a different route. And so instead of getting out of the Metroplex, the Swabber or the Worth departure that you're familiar with, you'll get a Joe Pool departure. Or if you're a big jet airliner out of DFW, you'll get a Nellen or a Jaspa or something like that. And what that does is it reroutes the airplanes over a certain route to get around the weather before they get off the ground. Now, when the swap notice comes out, they also put out a notice to all airliners to file your normal routes, and ATC will change them, but to fuel accordingly. And so that means it's time to put on some extra gas.
Yeah, I've been deviated before while flying a citation because of those bad weather events. They tried to send us, we were coming back from Colorado going into Denton, and they tried to send us to Midland first. And of course, we did not have the fuel for that. So we were unable, and then really it wasn't the storms at that point. It was because there was so much congestion in the airspace. And funny enough, I actually know the controller at Fort Worth Center that was trying to deviate us down to Midland, and I wound up having a conversation with him about it after the fact. And it was very enlightening.
It is. And so with the center, they got to maintain the IFR separation, which all pilots that fly IFR appreciate. In the center airspace, that's 5 miles and 1,000 feet. In the local area airspace and then the terminal approach airspace, that's 3 miles and 1,000 feet. And so when you're deviating for thunderstorms, you start going off your normal flight plan and then you start heading towards other airplanes. And so that's why we close the routes and change the routes through the process there. And so when the west gate closes, we'll all go over Nellen. But if there's a line of thunderstorms from Mexico all the way to North Dakota, all the transcontinental airplanes are coming south over DFW area. And so the center puts a restriction on us, 30 miles in trail for the whole Metroplex. So that means we can't launch one from the Metroplex, but for like one every 4 or 5 minutes.
Ooh, that's bad.
And so when you start adding it up, just say there's 8 at DFW. That's 30 to 40 minutes delays right there for the last guy. And then there's 3 at Love. There's 1 at Meacham. There's 1 at Addison. Soon you're talking 1 hour delays because you got to mix into the flight levels with those that are already up there.
And that's not including the arrivals. And now all of a sudden we're talking edicts and...
Yep.
I have been there, my friend.
Holds.
So
Oh, man.
back in the day, they would just launch everybody and then you get into a holding stack. And then they peel you off the holding. They descend you as the next one went down, the stack descends, and then you go. They've gotten away from that, and so they want minimum holding to maximize the fuel efficiency of the airplanes and the cost for the users. So when there's too many up there, they get into holding, then they stop people. So that's when you see ground stops, or there's too many go-arounds at an airport because the thunderstorm's coming, or it's building up and it's about to hit, and so there's 20 more in the airspace. We can get those down, but we're going to spin everybody else and put a ground stop out.
Okay.
And so that's what happens is ATC really tries their best to get as many airplanes on the ground at the destination when there's weather as they can until it's not safe.
Gotcha. Okay. And then after that, it's just full send or.
Well, it depends. Sometimes it is. Like if
Okay.
it just dies out or if it moves from west to east and it dies out going east, then it is a full send going west after that.
Gotcha. Okay. So are swaps done at every Bravo airport in the National Airspace System?
In different places, yes. That answer, it's kind of complicated because I haven't done a whole lot of that, but in the big metro areas, they are, because that way they have plans to get the airplanes out with the high traffic areas. And so they'll have plans to use different routes to go to different places. And the FAA publishes those on their webpage, fly.faa.gov.
Okay. Matt, how does this affect you working out of a Delta airport?
So, like you just mentioned, you asked about the Bravo airspaces. So, well, around here, DFW Bravo starts at DFW and it works its way out. So, yeah, that still applies to us at the Class Ds under. So, Alliance, Meacham, pretty sure Spanx, Denton, Addison over there. It still applies, but we don't have a lot of airlines. So, it's mainly the corporate jets that are flying Part 91, 135, those guys. And they'll do the same thing. They'll file a normal route, and then they'll taxi. Whenever they taxi out, we see if there's still a swap, because sometimes there's a swap. They taxi out, and then they're like, "Well, let me get a weather reroute for you," and then there's no more swap. They're like, "No, it's good now," so they keep their original route, and that's good for fuel planning for them. It's part of the iffy stuff is what he was saying. They'd have them in a stack and then work them down. Fuel efficiency, and then there's fuel emergency. So we do what we can for them on the ground, and the corporate jets normally are pretty good about that. And we tell them, they know. Most of those guys know on the bad weather days, have a little bit of extra if you can. At Meacham, we get one every once in a while that's like aircraft single engine land, that's a smaller propeller that'll actually go out, while there's a swap going on, and we'll tell them, hey, this is going this, and okay. The rest of them, they'll taxi out, or they'll call us, and we'll say, hey, we got this going on, and there's weather, obviously, and they're like, nope. And they'll just, I've had it happen. I had a guy the other day, it was swaps going on, and he was ready to go, and I'm like, hey, there's a weather reroute. At first, he was like, okay, we're ready for it. Gave him his whole weather route. Whenever we have to do that, we have to give him the full route clearance. So normally it's, on a normal clearance, swabber, is it 6 or 7 now? Swabber 7, Hoodad, whatever, and that's it, as filed.
Right, as filed.
So with the swaps, it's full route. And
That's good to know.
earlier in the year when it was ski season, a lot of those guys are going up to Aspen and Eagle. So it's a whole, you're cleared via this. Got your pencil still listening? This. No joke. And it made a big deal for their weather, for their fuel planning purposes.
Yeah.
But
I was going to say, going back to that citation trip that I did, that, where this particular event happened, we were coming out of Colorado and we had fuel planning. So, our standard typical fuel planning, we were not advised of any swaps at that time. And we were given a reroute more than halfway into our route. I mean, we were into Texas already, and it was like, all right, citation, we've got a change in your route, advised and ready to copy. Okay, ready to copy. And we kind of expected it. We carried a little extra fuel because we knew we were going to have to deviate a little further south and then come back up. They wanted to send us to Midland, like direct Midland, then back up, and then do the Likes 3, and exactly. And so when that happens, do pilots just have to accept it, or because it really messes with our fuel planning?
It depends on that. I mean, it's all up to the pilot's decision, but at some point they're going to say approach is not accepting arrivals over the corner post. And in that case, instead of coming over Bowie, you were coming over Glen Rose for the Likes arrival. And so that's what happened is they send you south to Midland to get you in line with everybody else that's going over that way.
Right.
To have the stream of airplanes come in. And so you could ask to go, hey, can I join the arrival over Abilene somewhere?
Right.
For my fuel. And then they'll see if they can work that out.
Gotcha.
You could always negotiate with them. How successful you are just depends on the amount of traffic and the friendliness of the controller.
And
Yeah.
that's exactly what we did. So that makes me feel better because the captain and I, we talked about it. We looked at our fuel. We were like, we can do this, but let's ask for this. So I did. We were asking, I think we went direct to Lubbock at that point, and we found a fix and asked to go direct to a fix on a different arrival that was very, or I think it was on the like 3. We asked to go to that fix. At first, we were told, no, we got another fix next to it, but then they gave us the next fix. And then it was so funny because, like, you guys play off each other. I say you guys, but, center is blaming approach is blaming center, and so we got on approach and the guy was like, direct Denton. And we were like, okay. And he was just happy as can be. Whereas you could tell that the prior controller was really stressed out trying to get everybody lined up because everybody's asking. For changes.
It depends because a lot of the arrival into Denton also is the same arrival that it serves Alliance, Meacham, Carswell, Spinks, those airports there. So you're getting in line with that. And then once approach sees you, like, yeah, I don't have anybody on it. You're going, you're crossing at I think 9,000. And the airliners are descending out of, either 11 or 17 crossing the same point there, or the point that's 5 miles away.
Yeah.
You talked about edicts, and we didn't talk about ground stops.
Oh, yes, ground stops. Let's talk
So
about
the dreaded, hey, Houston's ground stop. Southwest serves Houston X number of times a day. And so they just got to sit and wait. Usually thunderstorms are there or there's fog. Usually with the Cat 3, they can get in because Southwest has the Cat 3. ILS is on there. But then there's nothing we can do about it. Just a quick story about a thunderstorm. I was on a Southwest flight to Houston Hobby. Southwest 35, flew in the other day. It reminded me of it. And we took off, and I'm betting that they called the ground stop while we were on the runway or right before, like, oh, just let them go. It'll be okay. We went, and they go, yep, there's thunderstorms. We can't get in. We're looking at gate space at San Antonio. Okay. And we had just been to Austin a couple weeks before. And so I'm looking out the window, and I see the river. I see downtown. I'm like, there's the state capitol. There's UT. And I looked at my wife next to me. I'm like, honey, we're going back home. And we ended up coming back to Dallas because they didn't have gate space at San Antonio or Austin at the time.
Oh, wow.
So it is important that everybody understand why we're doing this as an ATC. What's coming up at Love Field here in April for about 9 or 10 months is we're going to close the runway. The city's going to close the runway and completely rebuild 1-3 right. And so that's going to be delays.
Chaos.
Yes.
Chaos.
Fun.
Delays. And it's going to be fun as a tower controller and sporty as pilots. I mean, we're not going to run full Oshkosh style or anything like that, but it's going to be
No pink dots?
no pink dots.
Oh, come on.
Maybe I should call and ask.
You should be like Southwest, 35.
Well, you can't do it with jets.
Pink dot.
You can only do it with props.
Okay.
Land on the pink dot.
Yeah, exactly.
That'd be fun though.
Wouldn't it?
So what we're going to see is, a call for release program. That's the other program. We talked about edicts. That's plus or minus 5 minutes from your wheels up time. And that's a legitimate wheels up time, not a takeoff clearance time. That's wheels up, radar contact. Call for release is between a 2 and a 3 minute window, depending on how the center wants to do it that day. And so for Hobby, they'll go, he's released at 43, void at 45. And so they don't see our arrivals at all. Well, I mean, they do, but they don't plan for it. And so we have to hit that gap and make it as a tower controller because we don't call approach and say, hey, I need this. No, we make it happen. Now, if they're jamming us on one runway and we can move a guy over to make a time, we'll do that. But that's a hard time to hit.
Yeah.
And for a while there, for a year, they were going like 1 minute release times. Hey, he's released at 43, void at 44. And we're like, ooh, that's going to be sporty.
Yeah.
So when we go single runway, it's also going to be, because when you're coming down, you've got the clearance, 1-3 left, continue, right?
Right.
And so tower's got a guy on the runway, and you're like, we're going to get there pretty soon. And you're like, is he going to clear him? Is he going to clear him? Because there's a guy on the runway turning off. As soon as that guy turns off, clear for takeoff. And then you're like, oh, there he goes. Slow it back, VREF for you. Mm-hmm. That everybody's favorite number right there.
Oh, yeah.
And so what we'll ask is slow to slowest practical speed, or unofficially we may say slow to final approach speed, because you've got that number memorized for the approach there. And what that does is that helps us build the timing for that. Generally, if the rivals are 4 miles in trail, as soon as the first guy lands, we'll put one in position, jets, we're talking about jets. between average runway occupancy time of about 50 seconds, 50 seconds. Guy turns off, and then we clear the next one for takeoff, and the next one comes in. So we're planning on a ground speed of about 120 to 150 knots. If you're doing more than that, you're going to make it tight. And so then we go to same runway separation rules, where for jets, it's 6,000 and airborne. Landing threshold, which is the displaced threshold. The departure in front of you has to be 6,000 feet down the runway and airborne for us to be legal.
Well, or if you're Matt, you just send them around.
Hey, you got to do what you got to do. I mean,
Exactly.
he's got those gaps over there. I got my gaps over at my side, and
Yeah.
And so,
it's just we don't have a lot of jets compared to Dallas
and so
Love.
what Matt can use at his Class D tower, because of the different types of traffic that he has, and like at Denton, our favorite airport up here, favorite contract airport, is with the single engine airplanes, you can use 3,000 feet on the runway. So the first airplane just has to be 3,000 feet down the runway and airborne, as long as the second one is the same type. Now, if it's a jet behind a single, it's still got to be 6,000 for that. And so we know the rules. We practice them. 3,000 between light single engine airplanes, 4,500 feet between light twin engine airplanes, less than 12.5, and then anything over 12.5 and all jets, it's 6,000, and it's airborne or clear of the runway. And so we could also land multiple airplanes at a time, as long as that first airplane is down 3,000 feet, then the second one can land. So I could have a Cessna, and he's landing, and I have a Pilatus right behind him.
Interesting. So what do you guys do with those pilots, and we know they're out there, who try to get around the system? For example, you might get an edict, so you just depart VFR, and then try to pick up your clearance in the air. Or
And so
I've had that happen.
we've had that happen. I've heard stories of, San Francisco, and they go to Oakland instead, and they go, nope, this guy waits 2 more hours before he can go to San Francisco.
Oh, so you punish him.
That's what they did.
Okay.
So we'll call some of us will call the center and say, hey, this guy's departing VFR. Just want to show he's going to try and pick up his clearance in the air.
Excellent. Okay.
And so they kind of get a warning sometimes. And, they'll look at the time, and the TMU, the traffic management
Right.
unit at the center, will say, hey, no, this guy, spin him or send him somewhere else. We don't have room for him.
Holds.
And so,
Send him to Midland.
yeah, so I tracked one time. He went VFR to Hobby. He couldn't wait 8 minutes. 8 minutes, not a long time. And so I went back and looked at the replay down there at Hobby. There were 6 jets that were vectored off their arrival to fit him in. And so because that guy had to go 8 minutes, 6 other users of the system were inconvenienced and vectored, and the complexity of the airspace and the operation were increased to fit him in because he wanted to go VFR even though he filed IFR and just had an 8-minute delay.
All right. So lessons learned there. Don't be that guy.
Mine was a citation that couldn't wait 30 minutes. VFR, he ended up holding until near emergency fuel and finally ended up landing. And then I guess he called it was Houston Tracon, I think, afterwards. He called them and had a little word with them, and they're like, what do you want? You're cutting in line, and it's IFR, especially like when he was talking about, 4 miles in trail for spacing over there at Meacham and then Denton sometimes. It's not 4 miles for the smaller guys. It's maybe 2 or 3. I mean, my personal cutoff is 2 miles. They're in and out nice and quick. You can't just squeeze in whenever you want and try to go around the system. It's, first come, first serve.
All right.
So
Well, guys, that leads us into best practices. What do you have for our viewers out there, all the pilots?
Don't be afraid to call clearance and ask what's going on. They're going to be busy, and as long as they're not working ground control, they should have time to be able to answer your questions.
Okay.
yep, same thing. Clearance and ground is normally combined over at Meacham, but on the IFR days, that's when you work. You work ground. On the VFR days, you work the tower where all the airplanes are flying, and we get the same thing. I've had people call up, hey, we're like 2 hours early. Can we get our clearance? And the clearances normally pop out of the printer on the flight progress strip about 30 minutes beforehand. And they last for normally about 3 hours. They'll push it to 4 on the bad weather days, but they'll call, they'll ask. I say, here's your thing, and it could change, and that partially leads into talk to flight service, get your weather briefing on those, especially the not so good IFR days where it's at minimums. Hey, where'd you break out? Minimums. So yeah, just call and ask.
All right.
And if you're in the air, you do everything you can short of doing something unsafe. So, but don't be that guy, essentially.
Yeah,
Don't
don't
get
be
into the
that guy.
situation on purpose.
Awesome.
And then,
Cool. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. This was definitely enlightening, some good practices that were shared. What questions do you guys have? Leave your comments below. We'd like to know for future episodes. Like, subscribe, and share, and we'll see you next time in the hangar.